Welcome to the Weekly Holler, a heady brew of dark history, haunted folklore, and backwoods strangeness.
And she was an old lady when she was telling this story. Said we were sitting out there and it was dark, awful dark. No moon, no stars, pitch black. And out in the front yard, there rears up this white thing.
Welcome to the Weekly Holler. I'm your host, Luke Boserman. I'm the blogger behind the Weekly Holler, and this was supposed to be our first official Facebook Live broadcast, but that didn't go so well, so we're resorting to Plan B here. But thank you for joining us anyways, and we're going to be putting up a video in one form or another every week on Facebook throughout 2017, so I hope you can join us in the future. Our tale for tonight is so chilling that I caught a cold while researching it, so I'll apologize for any sniffling or coughs you might hear. Frozen Charlotte is a New Year's Eve folk tale and folk ballad from the state of Maine. I'll be telling the story, and we're very fortunate to have special musical guest Britton Allen with us tonight. She'll be performing the song. And so ends this week's intro. Gather around the fire, it's time for a tale.
The story I'm going to tell you tonight happened on a night even colder than this one. It's the story of Charlotte. Now, Charlotte lived with her father and mother on a mountainside in Maine, and her father was a very wealthy man, and he loved to spoil Charlotte. He always made sure that she had dresses that were the same as the styles that the girls in the cities wore. And Charlotte was known for being the most beautiful girl around in that area. She had hair as black as a raven's wings and skin as white as a lily. But in addition to being the most beautiful girl around, she was also the most vain and self-centered. She loved to look at herself in the mirror for hours on end, and she went out and made social appearances just so a crowd could admire her. Well, one winter, Charlotte received an invitation to go to a New Year's Eve ball. So her mother took her into town and they bought a brand new dress for the occasion. It was made of silk and as blue as a robin's egg, and it fit Charlotte perfectly. Well, as the night of the ball arrived, the temperature dropped. And by nightfall, a frigid wind was blowing across the countryside. Charlotte's date, arrived in his sleigh, and he was wearing a thick wool cloak and a scarf and had a fur cap pulled down over his ears. And as he pulled up, Charlotte jumped into his sleigh wearing nothing but her silk gown. Well, her mother came out and begged her to wear a coat. She even offered her finest coat to Charlotte, but Charlotte refused, saying that such a bulky coat didn't match her dress very well. Well, Charlie pleaded with Charlotte to listen to her mother, but Charlotte was also as stubborn as she was beautiful, and she wouldn't have it. So they drove off into the windy night. Well, a couple miles into their journey, Charlie asked Charlotte, "Aren't you feeling cold?" Charlotte was shivering, and she said that she was very cold. And Charlie said that there was a blanket that he kept underneath the seat of the sleigh, and that Charlotte was welcome to wrap up in it. Well, Charlotte laughed and said that if she wrapped up in the blanket, she would arrive at the party smelling like the horses, and she couldn't arrive at a party smelling like horses. So they drove on. A little while later, Charlie noticed that Charlotte was growing very still, and he looked over and noticed that her lips were about as blue as her dress. Well, he stopped the sleigh and offered to take off his own cloak and give it to Charlotte. But she refused, saying that if she put on his cloak, it would wrinkle her silk dress, and she couldn't arrive at the party wearing a wrinkly dress. So Charlie sighed and slapped the reins and drove on. A little while later, he glanced over at Charlotte and noticed that her skin had grown as pale as the moonlight shining through the trees. Well, Charlie begged Charlotte to scoot over next to him so he could put his arm around her and shield her from the wind. But Charlotte refused and said that that wasn't proper. And then she smiled and told Charlie that she was starting to feel warmer now. Well, Charlie whipped his horses until they ran as fast as they could. And pretty soon he could see the lights from the village inn. Well, he pulled his sleigh up in front of it and guided it to a stop, jumped out of the sleigh, and he extended his hand to Charlotte and said, "Let's take a rest here, and you can warm yourself by the fire inside." But Charlotte didn't reply. She didn't even move. Charlie took Charlotte's hand in his own and found that she had frozen as solid as a marble statue.
The story of Frozen Charlotte was originally written as a poem called A Corpse Going to a Ball. And it was written by a journalist from Maine by the name of Seba Smith in 1843. Smith said that he was inspired to write the poem by something that he read in the newspaper in 1840, a story about a young girl who froze to death while traveling to a New Year's Eve ball. His poem was eventually set to music, and it made its way into the national folk music of the United States. It's now known as Young Charlotte, Fair Charlotte, or Frozen Charlotte. The story and song were so popular that there were even Frozen Charlotte dolls produced from the 1850s to the 1920s. These dolls were molded as a single piece of china. Sometimes they were baked into Christmas puddings. Imagine finding that in your dessert. And others were made with a glazed china front and an unglazed stoneware back, which enabled the doll to float on its back when placed in a bath. Our guest tonight is a talented musician with a YouTube channel where she covers, mixes, and mashes all kinds of music into some of the finest songs you've ever heard. Without further ado, here's Britton Allen performing the ballad of Frozen Charlotte.
Now Charlotte lived on the mountainside in a bleak and dreary spot. There was no house for miles around except her father's cot. And yet on many a wintry night young swains would gather there, for her father kept a social board and she was very fair. One New Year's Eve, as the sun went down, far looked her wishful eye out from the frosty window pane as merry sleighs went by. In a village 15 miles away was to be a ball that night, and though the air was heavy and cold, her heart was warm and light. How brightly beamed her laughing eye as a well-known voice was heard, and driving up to the cottage door, her lover's sleigh appeared. "Oh, daughter dear," her mother cried, "this blanket round you fold. It is a dreadful night tonight, you'll catch your death of cold." Oh nay, young Charlotte cried, and she laughed like a gypsy queen. To ride in blankets muffled up, I never would be seen. My silken cloak is quite enough, you know 'tis lined throughout. Besides, I have my silken scarf to twine my neck about. Her bonnet and her gloves were on, she stepped into the sleigh. Rose swiftly down the mountainside and o'er the hills away. With muffled face and silent lips, 5 miles at length were passed, when Charles, with few and shivering words, the silence broke at last. Such a dreadful night I never saw, the reins I scarce can hold. Fair Charlotte, shivering faintly, said, I am exceeding cold. He cracked his whip, he urged his steed much faster than before, and thus 5 other dreary miles in silence were passed o'er. Said Charles, how fast the shivering ice is gathering on my brow. And Charlotte still more faintly said, I'm growing warmer now. So on they rode through frosty air and glittering cold starlight, until at last the village lamps and the ballroom came in sight. The door and Charles sprang out, he reached his hand for her. She sat there like a monument that has no power to stir. He called her once, he called her twice, she answered not a word. He asked her for her hand again, and still she never stirred. He took her hand in his, and she was cold and hard as stone. He tore the mantle from her face, cold stars upon it shone. Then quickly to the glowing hall her lifeless form he bore. Fair Charlotte's eyes were closed in death, her voice was heard no more. And there he sat down by her side, while bitter tears did flow, and cried, my own, my charming bride, you never more will know. He twined his arms around her neck, he kissed her marble brow. His thoughts flew back to where she said, I'm growing warmer now. He carried her back to the sleigh, and with her he rode home. And when he reached the cottage door, oh how her parents mourned. Her parents mourned for many a year, and Charles wept in the gloom, till at last her lover died of grief, and they both lie in one tomb. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked my rendition of Frozen Charlotte. If you did, go check out the rest of my YouTube channel. And then if you liked the story, don't forget to check out theweeklyholler.com for more stories just like that one. Okay, so I think the moral of this story is if your mom tells you to wear a jacket, just wear a freaking jacket. And Barry Silver.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, and a special thanks to Britton Allen for sharing her talent. Check her out on YouTube. I'll put a link to her channel in the description of this video. If you haven't visited theweeklyholler.com, head on over and take a look at all the stories we have there. If you sign up for the email newsletter, you'll never miss another story. I hope you can join us again next week on Thursday for New Legends of Sleepy Hollow with author Richard Gleaves. That's all for tonight, and I'd like to wish you a very happy New Year from the Weekly Holler. Good night.